Good day, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Humor Book Launch. This is a platform that we acknowledge and engage with new scholarship on themes related to our research agenda on Africa at Humor. Today, we have two authors from the University of Leiden who will present on their new book, which is called AI for Healthcare Robotics. And these authors are Dr. Eduard Fosch-Villaronga, who is an assistant professor at the E-Law Center for Law and Digital Technologies at Leiden University. And there he investigates legal and regulatory aspects of the robot and AI technologies with a focus on healthcare, diversity, and governance. He has received several awards for his work, related to AI and connectivity and robotics, one of which is the Marie Curie Postdoctoral Fellowship. And the second guest is Hadassah Drukarch. She's a researcher at the E-Law Center for Law and Digital Technologies, the same institution at Leiden. She's the founder of the Law of Tech podcast, which aims to provide insights on how new technologies are impacting upon the law and the legal industry. She is a student at the advanced doing law and digital technology at Leiden University, and she's working. Her work is mainly navigates between law, the digital technologies, governance, business, and entrepreneurship. She also holds an LLB in international business law and an honors college law program certificate from Leiden as well. The book that they'll present, AI for Healthcare Robotics, was published by Taylor and Francis this year, 2022. And in this lecture, they will be talking about their work, mapping the major state-of-the-art developments in healthcare robotics and AI, their capabilities and applications, and the challenges that we are facing due to their integration within the healthcare environment. Thank you so much, Dr. Villaronga and Hadassah Drukarch, for gracing us with your presence. We will welcome you to discuss your book, and in the last 20 or 30 minutes, we will have a Q&A session engagement with the audience.
That is super great. So thank you. Actually, we are the ones to thank you all for having us in the book launch series. We are super honored to be able to be here and to present our work. But on the other way, we are also very much looking forward to engaging with you all, and also we would like to learn on your perspectives on the topic, and even like to be able to further expand our collaborations on this topic. And well, as you said, today we are going to talk about healthcare robotics on different concepts, definitions, but also considerations that come from our work at the School of Law, and that maybe they might resonate with some of the issues that that you might have been exploring. And as you said before starting, like, I am Eduard, and I work as an assistant professor here at Leiden University, and my work has a special focus on healthcare, but also lately I'm very much interested in diversity, governance, and transparency issues concerning robotics and artificial intelligence. And I'm joined today with my esteemed colleague, friend, and now co-author Hadassah Drukarch.
Yes, thank you very much, Eduard, and indeed, thank you very much also for the very elaborate introduction and for the invitation, of course. So my name is Hadassah Drukarch. I work as a researcher at the E-Law Center for Law and Digital Technologies at Leiden University, and there my work mainly navigates between law, digital technologies, governance, a little bit of business and entrepreneurship, human rights, and diversity and inclusion.
So on the program for today's sessions, in part one, we will present our work into defining healthcare robotics and artificial intelligence. Part 2 will focus on different categories that we have distinguished within this field, covering mainly surgical robots, assistive robots, and healthcare service robotics. Part 3 will delve deeper into the ethical, legal, and social considerations in relation to AI for healthcare robotics, where we will be discussing topics like autonomy, diversity, safety, or the future of education. And finally, we will conclude with some remarks and open the floor to questions. So that is all in terms of practicalities. So let's dive into our work.
Yes, thank you, Eduard. And indeed, let's dive into our work, starting with a topic that might seem slightly more distant from the field of healthcare robotics and AI, but which we believe that is nevertheless not any less important when we actually try to gain grip of this extremely complex domain that we're looking at. And that is, first of all, the importance of definitions. So let me start by stating that precise terminology has always been important. And even if definitions are not an outcome in itself, but merely a single step in a long process of understanding, terms, words, and vocabulary in general are still the primary reference we acknowledge and to which we also turn to define and understand concepts, ideas, and notions. Now, definitions allow us to better understand the world and the essence of what we find within it, and as such, it is through definitions that we create clarity and avoid misunderstandings when discussing particular subjects. Now, despite the importance of definitions, not all concepts are easy to describe, and this applies not only to the concepts that are referred to at a distance, but also those concepts that we actually use on a daily basis and with extreme frequency. Now, perhaps you're wondering what I'm going on about, because of course definitions are important, but you definitely didn't apply to, or you didn't sign up to a lecture on how to define different concepts, and what this actually has to do with AI for healthcare robotics is of course also a question. Now, this is because we see something similar happening with the words robot and artificial intelligence. So currently, there are many definitions for both, as established by many different parties, yet we currently don't have a clear definition in place with regards to artificial intelligence and robotics. And this may lead to confusion, especially when we try to actually apply and understand these definitions within different contexts, among which healthcare is, of course, one.
Yeah, and this applies to the field of healthcare robotics and artificial intelligence. It is a highly sensitive domain, which is increasingly being introduced to the massive opportunities offered by robotics and AI. And until now, however, the legal and ethical communities have not really generally accepted definition for the terms robot and AI in place, and let alone for robotics in a healthcare context. So to kickstart the efforts towards defining healthcare robotics and AI, we tackle this highly complex domain by first better understanding what healthcare robots are, and we will take you on a journey, on the journey that we took in this regard. Research has pointed out that an estimated 20% of the world's population experiences difficulties with physical, cognitive, or sensory functioning, mental health, or behavioral health, either in a temporary or permanent basis. Also, it might be acute or chronic and subject to change throughout one's lifespan. And a significant number of these individuals experience severe difficulties with so-called activities of the daily living, which refer to the level of independence of a person and includes activities and concepts such as washing, toileting, dressing, feeding, mobility, and transferring. And however, despite playing such a fundamental role in our everyday functioning and participation in society, the term health is often used without a clear understanding of what it exactly entails. And similarly, many definitions of care have been established, some very broad and some very specific. So we defined healthcare in accordance with some earlier approaches as being the organized provision of medical care to individuals, including efforts to maintain, treat, or restore physical, mental, or emotional well-being. And as such, healthcare encompasses the maintenance or improvement of health via the prevention, diagnosis, treatment, recovery, or cure of disease, illness, or injury, and other physical and mental impairments in people as delivered by health professionals and related health fields. So it is no surprise that robots have not only become routine in the world of manufacturing and other repetitive labor tasks, but are also becoming increasingly mainstream in other fields like the healthcare, where they are used within an entirely different environments and for until now really an unimaginable task involving direct interaction with human users in the surgical theater, the rehabilitation center, for instance, or the family room with therapeutic robotics, no? And actually, robotics and AI are some of the latest promising technologies expected to increase the quality and safety of care, while at the same time restraining expenditure and reducing also human contact too, no? At least recently. And it is for these reasons that healthcare robots are likely to be deployed at an unprecedented rate in order to carry out medical interventions, support biomedical research and clinical practice, and improve both the standard and accessibility of care to enhance basically patient health outcomes, to fill quantitative care gaps, supporting caregivers and aiding healthcare workers, or even to conduct therapy with children, or to keep elderly to with company. And yet here we see it again, while we have a clear understanding somehow of the context in which healthcare robotics are inserted to or will be developed, what it is really a healthcare robot, no? In 2008, the European Foresight Monitoring Network defined healthcare robots as systems able to perform mechatronic actions, which means force of movement exertions, based on processing information acquired through sensor technology to support the functioning of impaired individuals, medical interventions, care and rehabilitation of patients, and also individuals in prevention programs. And as such, robots encompass varying degrees of autonomy and broadly include affiliated technology, including sensor systems, algorithms for processing data, and cloud services. And it is precisely this combination of factors that led the European Parliament to identify the most interesting applications of healthcare robotics, including robot surgery, care, and socially assistive robotics, also rehabilitation systems, and also training for healthcare workers. And that is why Hadassah and I, we focus on three main categories for healthcare robotics. Mainly, we focus on surgical robots, assistive robotics, which we divided into physical assistive robotics, which we work with Beste. I see her in the room, and also social assistive robotics and healthcare service robotics.
Yes. Now, later on, we will talk more detail about all of these different healthcare robots, but the story really doesn't end there, because in addition to the robots themselves, more recently, we've also identified the tremendous possibilities that AI has to offer for healthcare robotics. Now, important to note first, however, is that not all healthcare robots incorporate AI. Broadly speaking, AI in medicine can be divided into two subtypes. So we're talking about virtual and physical AI. As such, AI for healthcare robotics is a design choice to afford learning and other capabilities for robots, but it does not always need to be present. So AI for healthcare robots falls under a spectrum of possibilities that depends much on the task to be performed, on the outcome to be achieved, and on whether AI will enable a more efficient, quicker, and safer robot performance. And this is really similar to their embodiment as well, because to complete a task, some robots may need a simple body. And we can think, for instance, of a speaker to provide oral information. We can think of more complex devices, such as, for instance, surgical robots to perform a surgery, which we will also elaborate on later on in this presentation. Now, traveling back into the past a little bit, following the introduction of AI in the second half of the 20th century, researchers and developers increasingly began to recognize that AI systems could significantly benefit the healthcare domain, and especially in the 80s and 90s, it was argued that in healthcare, such technology must be designed to accommodate the absence of perfect data and build on the expertise of physicians. Now, over time, it became evident that AI, which involves, of course, machine learning and natural language processing, serves exceptionally well in revolutionizing really any knowledge-intensive sectors, and healthcare was, of course, one of them. Advances in computing power, learning algorithms, and the availability of large data sets, which we often refer to as big data, sourced from medical records and wearable health monitors, have proved to be useful in overcoming this significant shortcoming. And that is also why AI is applied in several healthcare areas. And it's thanks to the processing of vast amounts of health data from electronic health records that AI soon can help diagnose diseases as accurately as experienced pediatricians can. They can predict women at high risk of postpartum depression or give triage advice safer than that of human specialists are able to do so currently. AI also involves diagnostic accuracy, efficiency in provider workflow, and clinical operations. It facilitates better disease and therapeutic monitoring, and enhances procedure accuracy and overall patient outcomes. Now, this all really comes to show how recent and expected advances in robotic and AI technologies may actually entail incredible and unprecedented progress for medicine and healthcare delivery, both in terms of the quantity of the healthcare provided, but also the quality, and that could eventually help repair diagnosis errors and their very high consequences for society.
And another important aspect of the integration of robotics and AI in healthcare space is the healthcare robotic ecosystem, which includes the network of stakeholders involved in those human-robot interactions. In a European project called RoboLaw that finished in 2014, they identified different stakeholders, including producers and employers of robots, insurance companies, trade unions, user associations, professional users, and policymakers. And as you can imagine, the field of healthcare robotics calls for a more specific approach because of the main parties, that they are involved usually in a healthcare setting. In this particular context, many different actors use healthcare robotics. We could think about doctors, medical professionals, patients, family members, caregivers, healthcare providers, or even technology providers. And all of these stakeholders have similar goals. Although they experience healthcare from different viewpoints, on the one side, some may provide medical care and independence, preserving patients' dignity. But then also the user are experiencing this completely different, And then what we did is to follow the work of Laurel Rick from the University of San Diego, and we divided the stakeholders into primary stakeholders, those that will use healthcare robotics on a regular basis. Then secondary users, which are those involved in using healthcare robotics, but who will not directly use them themselves. And then tertiary stakeholders, which are those stakeholders that are interested in the use and deployment of this technology in society, but it is unlikely that they will use them directly. Now, Hadassah will deep dive into each of the above categories of healthcare robotics and explain the use of AI within this context.
Yes, thank you, Eduard. So moving to the various healthcare robots and AI that we defined within this context, we'll first of all be looking at surgery robots, but as Eduard already mentioned, we also have socially assistive robots, physically assistive robots, and of course also healthcare service robots. So first of all, we have the surgery robots. Now, it's approximately 4 decades ago that the first robot was actually used in the theater for surgery, and the extent to which surgical fraternity has embraced robotic surgery since then has been unparalleled, since many advances have been made in the field, and that's partly due to the plethora of benefits afforded by robotics that are simply absent in traditional surgical methods. And we can think, for instance, of stability, of accuracy, integration with modern imaging technologies, greater range of motion, telesurgery, in addition to many other benefits that robotic surgery offers. Now, before we actually move to kind of delving deeper into the topic of surgery robots, it's again very important to look at the definition, and we'll do that for each and every category that we have. So first of all, surgical robots. And surgical robots are devices or service robots that support surgeons during surgical procedures. Now, since the mid-80s, when the first robotic-assisted surgery procedures took place, surgery robots have allowed surgeons to conduct surgeries with a lesser chance of damage to the patient's body, more successful surgeries, and less invasive procedures, also known as minimally invasive surgery, that grant shorter patient recovery time in hospital stays, less pain, less blood loss, noticeable scars and discomfort, and also less risk of complications following the procedure. In addition, since robots are devoid of shortcomings such as fatigue, for instance, or momentary lapses of attention, they can perform repeated and tedious surgeries, enabling at the same time the performance of surgical procedures that were previously considered impossible. And we see that almost on an everyday basis when we look at surgical procedures. Now, as we're heading towards the future, robotic systems are increasingly beginning to equal human specialists at precision surgical tasks. They may even outperform human surgeons in precision control, efficiency, and also accuracy in the near future. And although there is still room for improvement here, I think we'll definitely see a lot more robotic surgeries in the future. Now, the question, of course, that we may want to ask here, also in the context of this presentation, is where does AI actually come into the picture? Now, owing to recent advances in medicine, AI has the power to completely revolutionize contemporary surgery thanks to its combination with the processing of vast amounts of information and unlimited data storage, coupled with robotics, visualization, advanced instrumentation, data analytics, and also connectivity. And in this sense, what AI actually adds to surgery robots is the potential use of decision-making algorithms to understand and react to specific data, making surgery performance more effective and reliable. So we have a couple of examples. And first of all, we could, for instance, think of a prostate recognition algorithm, which could make the machine learn whether a given image provides an indication of prostate cancer or not, thus reducing the variability in radiologists' reading of magnetic resonance imaging. In another example, we could think of the IBM's Watson, which created an intelligent surgical assistant that uses unlimited medical information using natural language processing to clarify surgeons' doubts about surgery performance. Now, seeing all of these advances, it is reasonable to expect that future surgical robots would perceive and understand complicated surroundings, conduct real-time decision-making, and also perform desired tasks with increased precision, safety, and efficiency. And it's because of this, as I just mentioned, the combination of robotics and AI, that we will likely see many more robotic-assisted surgeries in the near future.
And the next category that of healthcare robotics that we studied are socially assistive robotics. And in this field, it is usually oriented towards developing robots capable of close and effective social interactions to provide optimal assistance and thereby acting in line with the concept that we may all have of caregiving now. And unlike chatbots or other artificial intelligence driven assistive technology, socially assistive robotics use their embodiment, which means the arms and the sensors and the touch screens, to generate, modulate, and provide assistance through social interaction. And this has resulted in a gradient spectrum of robot types that span from robots in which the physical interaction has not a primary role. Maybe the assistance is provided through social cues like the robot now, that you can see in the screen, or to more complex mix of both social and physical human-robot interaction, where robots use social cues and invite the user to have a physical contact with them. No? In the video that you may be able to see now, we can see the seal robot Paro, which is an example of a robot designed to interact with users socially in a sort of a human-animal relationship and allow for physical contact with the patient, which has been proved to have enormous benefits for patients with dementia. And we have also colleagues that, for instance, have worked with a robot called Plasmi, Beste Ofkan is in the room, in which they try to control the sensory input for non-neurotypical children, thanks to the touch of the robot, and that has a really positive effect on different patients, also with dementia and others. And the embodiment of socially assistive robotics include we could say maybe 4 ones, like anthropomorphic, zoomorphic, caricatured, and functional, and they play a significant and crucial role in many applications. So children, for instance, feel a stronger friendship ties with physically embodied robots compared to virtual avatars. and a physically present robot tutor produces better learning results, and sometimes we have seen in the literature that individuals that suffer from cognitive impairments find the interaction with a physical robot way more efficient, natural, and preferred than with a simulated one. And at the same time, also, like the embodiment enhances what we call in HRI a presence, and it helps allocate social interactional intelligence, typically via the gaze or the facial expressions, and make the robot task capabilities understandable also from the user perspective, no, which is also very, very important. And to create more clarity within the existing socially assistive robotic categories, together with Hadassah, we distinguish between those that they are geared towards therapy and those that they are more on the care robot side, that and we did so to provide a more explicit framework that accentuates the need for manufacturers to state such robots' intended use, to avoid misclassification and a lack of the necessary safeguards to ensure safe use. And this is because usually those therapeutic robots might have to follow what we call the medical device regulations, with put forward like a stronger protections from the legal side, but maybe care robotics not that much. So like from the legal point of view, that it is important. So care robots primarily provide social interaction and support in any environment, including but not limited to a healthcare setting. For instance, think of a robot that keeps an elderly person company in their home. And on the contrary, therapeutic robots assist users with a specific form of therapy, which are condition and environmental specific, and thus used within controlled environments. And the application of artificial intelligence within the subfield of social assistive robotics may further blur the understanding that we have with the application and functions, but at the same time, it may simultaneously bring new and unimaginable areas of applications within the context of social assistance that have not been identified before, and that might entail significant progress for the field, such as to benefit the users. And in terms of therapy and care provision, we have a couple of examples that we wanted to share with you. For instance, sorry, I think that I pressed something wrong and then I went back too far in the presentation. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, I think you're pretty close to.
Yeah, there. Okay, sorry. So together with a colleague, Adam Poulsen, we've been working on sex robot technology, and these are service robotics that perform actions contributing directly towards improvement in the satisfaction of the sexual needs of a user. And many authors believe that given their assistive capabilities, they could also use this technology for disability care purposes, as disabled populations have been traditionally disregarded as sexual beings when the research shows that there's no loss of libido due to age or health condition. And usually this type of robot technology have different embodiments that may include full or partial bodied humanoids or body parts that could be used for sex-related tasks, or also this robot technology may display realistic sex-related body movements and have sensors to react in real time to user interaction. And this could be very useful to help educate disabled populations in very important sexual matters, like, for instance, consent. And thanks to that, we could maybe help this part of the population reduce the large amount, alarming number of abuse that they may have. But also when we think about socially assistive robotics, we could think about another completely different field, like, for instance, the cute robot from Luxai, or the Casper robot, which are usually used for therapy and educational activities with children under the autism spectrum disorder. Or for instance, the word now, no, that we saw before, that it is designed to enhance facial recognition and appropriate gaze response, thereby teaching children who have trouble interacting with other people relevant social skills and the necessary means to apply these skills in practice in their relationship with human peers. No? And all of these advances reveal that the more AI technology advances, the more investigation will be needed around the benefits and opportunities, but also like with the drawbacks that this may bring to society.
Yes, and then the second category, which makes up the category of assistive robots, is that of physically assistive robots. So over the past couple of years, there has been an increasing demand for physically assistive robots. And one of the reasons for this is the aging population. And this has led, among other things, to increased demands for rehabilitation robots, but you could also think, for instance, of personal care robots, which help users in their activities of daily living. Now, seeing the significant advances that this technology has, it is once again likely that, and also seeing the fact that the population, for instance, here in Europe is aging more than ever, it is likely that we'll see more of these robots as well. So once again, a definition for physically assistive robots. We have defined this type of robot as personal care robot that physically assists the user to perform a required task for providing supplementation or augmentation of personal capabilities. And this was on the basis of the ISO 13482/2014, which is on personal care robots. And in this sense, physically assistive robots may assist the robot operator, the person using the robot, or both actually, through physical interaction to perform specific tasks, such as, for instance, you could think picking up a glass, or you could think of opening a door or walking around a house. So in our work, we have built upon some earlier classifications, and we basically we distinguished between 4 categories of physically assistive robots. And we're specifically talking about robots that support the user in the performance of specific tasks. And within that, the distinction between upper and lower limb assistive robots that perform the physical task for its users, robots used for rehabilitation, and also robots that function as body part replacements. For the sake of time, we won't go into each of these, but we have more information, of course, on that within our book. Here too, the discussion about AI is also extremely important. So due to its increased capabilities with respect to advanced data acquisition, processing, and control techniques, AI can enable the development of increasingly sophisticated robots that can then take part in delivering care in a more efficient way by using some of the most popular techniques, which are based on different artificial neural networks and adaptive algorithms, algorithm configurations, fuzzy logic, or other techniques to perform pattern detection or motion intention analysis. Now, as such, AI can provide the basis for developing more reliable, flexible, and adaptable systems that can truly help users with their physical needs. And it can also lead to more trust of these systems in the future.
And beyond the use of robots for direct assistance through medical procedures and other therapeutic applications, or physical assistant robots, robots are also used to facilitate the delivery and support of doctors and other medical staff works in another way, no? And generally, these robots assist in the delivery of medication and supplies, enhance patient-doctor contact, and even clean hospital facilities. And while these robots may not fit into the typical picture of a healthcare robot, these robots perform vital tasks within this sector and have distinct characteristics from mere industrial robots. And we call them healthcare service robotics. Now, with the high and rising cost in the healthcare sector, social pressure for lower prices, labor shortages, and an increasingly sick and aging population, however, the market for healthcare robotics has proved to be a very promising avenue for investment. In 2018, it was somehow predicted that the demand for professional service robotics to support healthcare staff would reach actually 38 billion USD by 2022. towards actually lowering the workload of healthcare staff and helping complex tasks that need to be carried out, no, indicating the really strong potential for increased productivity and resource efficiency that healthcare service robotics can offer to the health sector. And thanks to their high levels of autonomy, these robots are generally believed to make the delivery of care and hospital management more effective and quick, reduce labor costs for repetitive and often tedious tasks, and improve healthcare practitioners' work. And more specifically, healthcare service robotics can streamline routine tasks, reduce the physical demands on human workers, and ensure more consistent processes. At the same time, they can also keep track of the inventory and place timely orders, help make sure supplies, equipment, and medication are where they are needed at the appropriate time, and ensure that hospital rooms are sanitized and readied for incoming patients quickly, and offer excellent sanitary tools, which are vital in care settings anyway. And while this means that healthcare service robotics can replace jobs or assist in the performance of tasks traditionally performed by human healthcare workers, many tasks performed by them will likely still require some degree of human intervention. For instance, think about vehicles that assist in delivering food from the hospital kitchen to a specific hospital room. While such a robot may relieve human healthcare workers from the task of food transport, nurses will still be required to give the delivered food to the patient. And in this way, hospitals can ensure that nurses spend more time with their patients rather than pushing very heavy trolleys around the hospital corridors. And moreover, as is the case with socially assistive robotics, development in this area cannot be aligned or limited to just a single purpose. The delivery robot relay, for instance, that it is used in hotels, hospitals, public spaces, or for instance, think about the VG Go telepresence robot used in healthcare, education, or business, offer immense opportunities to streamline the logistics of any particular industry that requires somehow 24/7 transport, cleaning, and disinfecting. And as you can see in the slides, the coronavirus pandemic cannot be left mentioned here, because robots are continuously seen as a potential solution to deliver effective care, while at the same time reducing human contact. And whether that, of course, like challenges many questions, no, until what extent we can really do so. That is at least like how the industry is seeing healthcare service robotics. And despite their tremendous benefits, currently the literature related to healthcare service robotics lack a little bit of a specific categories. That's why, like Hadassah and I, we were very much interested into putting some order into the robots that we saw, because until now they were being described as based on their characteristics, but they were not grouped. So our book is the first attempt to clarify this domain, and we differentiate between those healthcare service robotics that completely take over medical staff tasks, such as cleaning the floors of the hospital and so. Those robots that support routine non-medical tasks, such as bringing the medicines from the pharmacy to the patient's room, and those that facilitate a specific task. No? So for instance, robots that support tele-remote care and so. And another critical characteristics of these robots relates to their level of autonomy. While some healthcare service robotics function fully autonomously, others still require a certain degree of human intervention to operate. And again, others function autonomously to a certain extent and assist rather than replace medical staff. And in more recent years, advancements in artificial intelligence have brought into existence predictions that this new technology will take over health service activities currently being delivered by clinicians and administrators soon, while the abilities of service robots have gradually exceeded the performance capabilities of human service providers in areas related to memory, computing power, physical strength, and handling unpleasant or dangerous tasks. existing service robotics are still characterized by a minimal level of AI integrated into their applications as part of their service provision capabilities. And as such, the exceptional hype about the advanced abilities of AI within the healthcare service industry is somehow inaccurate, especially the notion that AI will be able to replace human healthcare providers fully, but instead allows for the creation of a healthcare service system, which could be termed as sort of AI enabled or AI augmented.
Yes. So then moving towards some of the wrap up of this presentation, we have a section of this presentation which we would like to devote to some of the ethical, legal and societal considerations which we should take into account when we look at healthcare robotics and AI. So we have a number of topics that we would like to discuss, among which, first of all, autonomy levels. So in terms of autonomy levels, I think that throughout this whole presentation, one of the recurring topics that has come back and we've referred to various times is the fact that surgery robots, for instance, but also all the other robots that we have mentioned, are becoming increasingly autonomous. Now, one of the interesting things here is that when we talk about autonomy, this in our field, at least the field of, or the legal field, automatically kind of raises questions with regard to responsibility and accountability and who should be responsible or accountable in case something goes wrong. So one of the things that we noted in our own work is that when we talk about automation, there currently has been no standard form of kind of like indicating the different levels of automation which we can establish within medical robotics. And we have specifically looked at surgery robots to provide an example, whereas we have seen this, for instance, when we look at the automotive industry, where there have been standards or where standards have been established with regard to autonomy levels and what this means in practice. So what we've tried to do with a couple of other colleagues at the ELO Center for Law and Digital Technologies is to establish some sort of standard where we identify the various levels of autonomy of surgery robots in relation to the various roles of the main stakeholders and what this means in practice for surgery robots. Interesting, I think, to mention here also is that what we're currently seeing is a move towards level 4 of autonomy, which is almost, of course, full autonomy of the surgery robots. But what we've noticed in practice currently is that we're still far off from the specific level of autonomy. Currently, I think that the fully autonomous surgeries have only been performed on pigs, and humans have not been involved yet. So from a legal perspective, keeping this kind of short so we can move to the Q&A as soon as possible, but maybe an interesting point to specifically note here is that when we talk about autonomy levels in the context of, for instance, surgery robots, we see that the ecosystem is getting increasingly complex. There are various stakeholders involved, and as a result, it might not always be clear from a legal perspective who is responsible if something goes wrong. And there's a very close interaction between on the one hand, the surgeon, on the other hand, the support staff, and also the surgical robot itself. And I think that for the future, or Eduard and I both speak on behalf of both of us, believe that we should have more clarity on this topic and on this specific interaction between the various stakeholders if we want to make sure that we actually attribute responsibility to the right party instead of kind of automatically, which is done or it also has been stressed various times in the literature, we kind of attribute the responsibility to the robot, to the device, because that's the easiest way out. But that's, we think, at least not as simple as that.
Yeah, definitely. And another aspect that cannot be ignored when we are discussing these aspects is the topics of diversity and inclusion. And to illustrate this aspect, we would like to take you on a recent journey. We took it the Eurobench robot testing facilities in Madrid, and we traveled there because we are part of a European project called Eurobench, and our project is called Propelling, which seeks to understand if the standard on personal care robots is actually addressing safety sufficiently. And to this end, we tested particularly safety requirements for systematically appraising safety assessments and regulations for marketed lower limb robotic exoskeletons. What we do basically is to appraise the possibility for harnessing information from experimentation and research and development to improve existing standards. So in short, science for robot policies. And despite not being our main point of focus, we could not help but notice the immense lack of diversity and inclusion considerations into the development of the robotic exoskeleton that we used in the experimentation activities. Mechanical and robot technology have been historically part of a distinct male sphere, and although humans vary broadly in size and shape, and while adapting exoskeletons to each human is complex and challenges manufacturers to properly fit these machines to the individual users, failure to do so may lead to the development of exoskeletons that are potentially uncomfortable, or worse, that they are unsafe. No? And the standard acknowledged to have more specific requirements on different types of people, children, elderly, and pregnant women. But unfortunately, they didn't really provide that in the revision of 2020. And unfortunately, wearable robot engineers and developers often do not develop such devices primarily on the premise that this should fit as all the population as possible. For the next slide,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, another issue that we have specifically noted is that of the safety dimensions, because one of the things that we've noticed, specifically when we also look again at exoskeletons and personal care robots, for instance, the ISO 13482/2014, is that the standard, for instance, very much focuses on physical injury to users, instead of also focusing on the broader concept of safety, which may also include, for instance, psychological aspects rather than only physical aspects of safety. So what we believe, and also based on some of the current work that we are doing, but also on some of the previous work we have been doing in terms of understanding what safety means and how this should be included in that particular standard, many other factors should also be taken into account. We could think, for instance, of privacy, of security, environmental aspects, but also responsibility and accountability in more depth should also be discussed. Currently, this very much remains a topic of discussion. I think there can also be much discussion about what exactly safety means in the first place. But perhaps that is something that we can discuss in the Q&A in a minute. But that's one of the points that we also noted.
Yeah, and a final concern is that we also noticed that the level of education and training required in comparison with the traditional ways of delivering care, like, is actually transforming. And we see this especially in surgery robots. While robotic surgery has shown to have a steep learning curve, there is not that much agreement on a specific learning curve, and a lack has been acknowledged in the development of a comprehensive training and credentialing framework. And there are currently no standardized training modules for the use of surgical robots, at least in Europe. And as a result, it is uncertain what satisfactory certification is required to be considered a robotic surgeon, no? And well, it should come as no surprise to you that the incorrect use of medical equipment is a major reason for medical errors, and that not having a clear framework that establishes a common minimum baselines for robot surgeons creates incongruity in procedural safety. But the importance of having a validated training curriculum in place not only springs from the responsibility towards patient safety, it is also important to ensuring issues with credentialing and associated liability. And in this respect, a sound basis for such a framework demands a clear and elaborate overview of the most significant categories currently established within the field of surgical robots, but also their intended purpose, use, and main characteristics.
Yes, and then finally, some conclusions and key takeaways of this presentation of our work. So we have a number of takeaways that we think are specifically important. So first of all, the fact that there are lacking definitions. I think that's kind of the red thread that has been going through our entire presentation from the very start. And that is that currently definitions are really lacking on each of the specific types of healthcare robots. And we believe, especially looking from our perspective, from the legal perspective, without definitions, it will become extremely difficult to actually regulate in the first place, these technologies. And I think that lacking definitions may have many more consequences as well, of course. Then we have the ethical, legal, and societal considerations, which we must not forget to take into account. What we have noted in some of our previous work is that for developers of robotic devices, it is oftentimes, or their main goal is oftentimes to create a robot that might actually work and that would be able to enter into the market. But there are many other considerations that should be taken into account when developing a robot, and not simply the market-related aspects or financial aspects or any other aspects in that sense. And finally, perhaps our favorite topic is also updating regulations. What we see nowadays very much when we look at the development of new technologies is that regulation technology often develops way faster than the regulations, and regulation is oftentimes not really able to keep up with current developments in technology. So we believe by actually looking up, for instance, definitions, what defines a specific healthcare robot, for instance, and at the ethical, legal, and societal considerations, we might be able to look at regulation as well in a somewhat more faster pace than we have seen with some other technologies in the past. So I think that those pretty much sum up some of our key takeaways of the presentation. Of course, if you're interested to learn more about healthcare robots and AI, we also have, or that was of course the main part of this presentation, to present our work in the book that or that is about to be published, at least on the 7th of June. The idea is that the book will be out. And yeah, it's available for pre-order if you're interested, and I think that we'll leave it there. I don't know if you want to wrap it up, Eduard, but go for it.
That is it. No, thank you so much for having us, and we hope that it was not too much information for you all, but we are extremely excited to receive questions if you have.
Thank you very much, Hadassah, and thank you, Eduard, for that elaborate presentation. It was very fascinating to hear a lot of the technical aspects of AI's capabilities in robotics, in healthcare, and hospitalization, which I think my colleagues who are in the room might find very valuable as we pursue our hospital ethnography. So at HUMA, one of our strategic programs is the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Ethics of Care, and Questioning Future Hospitals in Africa. So a considerable group of us are interrogating what hospitalization means with respect to AI in the African space. So this was very valuable to listen to. Yeah, so I would open the floor to my colleagues and guests in the room if they have any questions.
Then otherwise we will have like some questions for you guys. Like we also were curious to know like what is the main developments that the African context is interested in? Is it in surgery robotics? Is it on therapeutic robotics?
Well, that's a very good question, which might have variable answers. What comes to my mind as I am pursuing ethnography in Zambia, I'm interested to see what values people have with respect to AI and AI in healthcare. So, and I'm thinking about this because from a developmental kind of framework and think about development paradigms, which are usually not, they don't coincide with people's values. I think it's important to understand what exactly people interpret as helpful healthcare with respect to AI versus what we think we understand for people. So that's what my research is kind of unpacking, but especially the ethics of care is something that I'm tackling with, trying to see how adopted technologies kind of reform or reimagine the ethics of care with these shifting the shifting landscape of technologies in hospitals. My colleagues might say something different. I have like Aza and Amina and Dominique, Leah, all of whom are situated in different parts of the continent. They might share a different answer. But I have a question as well with respect to your presentation. And my question is with respect to the different legal frameworks which exist when dealing with technology or data or technology diplomacy. So, I mean, you're more conversant in the field of law, and I'd like to hear what you think about how we might reconcile with technologies given the different legal regulations when it comes to data, when it comes to technology. Say a particular region, whether it's the EU wants to impact on a particular healthcare region elsewhere that has different healthcare frameworks. How can we negotiate that aspect? I mean, right now with data as well, China, for instance, has their own set of regulation restricted data as compared to the EU and North America. How might we then reconcile with those differences when we are sharing the so-called AI for good?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, right? So what we see is that currently robot developers, there are like different types. So some of them, they might be shipping these technologies worldwide. Some of them, they are just like operating internally in a specific country. In Europe, what we have, it is what we call the CE marking. So robots that comply with, for instance, the standard that we presented here, the ISO 13482, they can show compliance with what we call the machinery directive. And then by doing so, they might be able to apply for the CE mark and then place their market into the, place their robot into the market. But of course, every producer of any product, it is not only the part of robots, but any product needs to be mindful of the laws and legislations that are happening on each of the places. No, that is why, for instance, when it comes to the Christmas campaign, in Europe, for instance, we may remove some products from the market that might be considered unsafe, for instance, because they have like small pieces that might provoke children to chunk and so. And the same would happen with robotics, no? So we see that with the advances of robots and AI, there will be the more and more need for two things. One, on the mindfulness on how data protection regulations are being currently addressed worldwide, especially like because a lot of these systems process vast amounts of data that might be personal, and there are like different legislations, for instance, in Europe, that they extend the extraterritorial application of these legislations. No, so if a company based in Africa is processing data from a European citizen, needs to abide to those European rules. But also, and I think most importantly, and sometimes not that well taken into account, goes a little bit on your work, I would say, into trying to understand how the perceptions and the attitudes towards automation are being taken into consideration in the development and use of robotics in different systems. No, deploying such technology in different contexts, it is completely different. No, especially when we take into consideration the global north and the global south perspectives.
If I can also add to what you just mentioned, specifically with regard to data, and I think that's something that you just, Manila, also specifically addressed, is that at least one of my biggest critiques on the GDPR, which we have in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation, is indeed its extreme focus on Europe itself. So one of the key ideas behind it was to create an internal or at least enhance the European internal market. But when we simply already look at this presentation, we are of course not looking at Europe alone. And I think that for now, at least, when we also look at the relationship with, for instance, the United States and transferring data from the one to the other country, I think that a lot of problems occur. And I think that, at least from a European perspective, we somehow have missed out on the important aspect that also when we look at healthcare robots, it doesn't limit itself to Europe alone. I think that's something that at least we should look at in the future when we talk about revisions or something in this sense of data protection laws.
Thank you so much, Edward and Hadassah, for your contributions. There's a question in the chat by Jason Archer. Jason, you are in the room. Would you like to pose your question directly? Your microphone is off.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll actually abandon that question for now. It doesn't really matter. I've been doing a lot of research too. I finished a dissertation project last year looking specifically at the Da Vinci robotic surgical assistant. What I'm curious about, so I've been following your work on Twitter a little bit. I'm glad you posted this link because I don't know anything about human. I'm glad I happened upon this. A far-ranging talk. I'm really excited to learn more about your book. But what I didn't hear about, and maybe I just missed it, and I'd be curious if you did some of this research, are you looking into, when you're thinking about your framework and you're thinking about frameworks of autonomy and responsibility and ethics, are you looking into the way that these robotics companies are gathering and using both like surgeons' data when they're performing surgery and training these robots or training with these robots, and also data that's being collected when the robots are interacting with patients in order to make the robots more autonomous, right? So there's this whole set of training criteria that's happening with these companies, a lot of it proprietary, at least in the United States, that's collecting training data from surgeons as they are training with these robots in order to eventually make them more autonomous, right? To shift that labor. So I'm just wondering if you talk about that at all in the book, if you thought about that as part of your framework. Thanks for allowing me to ask my question.
No, thank you so much, Jason. So in particular, if this is the particular question, we did not exactly look into that. But what we do is we had a research also with Hadassah and other colleagues into trying to understand a little bit like these levels of autonomy. And what we see basically is that there is a sort of shift with the autonomy levels, and then like we've been specifically working a lot on these autonomy levels, which means that basically the more the surgery robot is autonomous, the more the responsibility should be placed on the manufacturer instead of the surgeons. And then what we see connected to this is that, and it's what we presented in the presentation, is the questions with respect to education, and with respect to that, we are educating future surgeons within approved standard educational settings. But then when it comes to the preparation of robotic surgeons, that happens more on a training basis, that it is developed by companies and that it is not that much monitored by governments and ministries of education. This comes within also the checks that the knowledge needed in order to support the tasks that they are being developed by the robots is often unchecked, but it is usually geared towards understanding whether the task is performed correctly or not. And then what we see, at least with Hadassah and Pranav and Bart, what we see is that the only moment in which sort of like there is a raising question on this is when there is the report of an adverse event. So I am sure that you are familiar with the MAUDE, like because it comes from the US. I think it's much more structured than in Europe. But what we see is that somehow there is not that much of a reporting system of adverse events, specifically in surgery, which means that then there is little understanding on what it is exactly that it is being performed and how successful this is, because also hospitals might be a little bit hesitant in publishing every single detail of their performance if the surgery has gone well, or successful, So I think that there's still a lot to do that. more information there should be into understanding what is the knowledge that it's being poured into these systems by surgeons and by company and scientific publications, and what are the impacts of that. No, because we also see that IBM Watson started very strong in diagnosis for breast cancer and so, but then now I think that they discontinued or they sold that part somewhere else. So I think that that is a really important topic that definitely needs more research. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Edward. We don't have much time, and I will just allow anyone in the room who has any questions to indicate by showing an emoticon.
What we wanted also to say with Hadassah is that we have, if anyone in the room is interested, we have a flyer for a discount on the book. If you are interested in it, we're going to post it here on the chat, but if you guys also can post it on your website, we're very happy if you also can include there so that people benefit from also having a discount on the book.
Yes, I will share it in the chat if that's handy for you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. We will definitely circulate that link. Well, seeing as we don't have any further questions, we'd like to take this moment to thank you both, Edward and Hadassah, for sharing your valuable work on AI, robotics, and healthcare. This was very helpful, as I mentioned, since we are pursuing hospital ethnography on our continent, and very interesting perspectives. And we hope to see you again. We'd like to also invite you all to our following book launch next week. We have a special guest, Armand R. Towns, who will be speaking on Black media philosophy. And this week we also have a seminar, a doctoral seminar with Marie Rodet, who will speak about her work in Bulangui, a free village. She will be sharing that in the doctoral seminar, and other seminars forthcoming are by Roger Casment and Bongani Kona, our next book launch after Armand Towns. So thank you so much, Edward and Hadassah. This was their book launch on AI and healthcare robotics.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.